Going on with our basic principles, we said that cattle want to see you, cattle want to go around you. The third one is that cattle want to be with and go towards other cattle. And so when we start thinking about handling facilities, okay, there's a reason for having cattle handling facilities kind of set up in a U shape, all right, where cattle come in going one direction, they circle around, and they go back in the direction from which they came, okay, which is the fourth principle. And they would like to go back to where the other cattle are at. And let me give you an example of that, okay? We've all heard of a barn fire, all right? And probably the examples that I've heard the most of is in horses. You get the horses out of the burning barn, you know, you think you've got them safe, okay, and the horse runs back into the burning barn. Why did they do that? Because they were returning back to what they considered a safe, comfortable spot. All right. They don't realize that the barn is burning. All right. They just realize that that pen or that inside the barn was safe and comfortable. The last principle is that cattle can only process one main thought at a time. So when we get cattle that are stressed, okay, they're focused on that stress factor, all right? They're no longer paying attention to your commands, okay? Where you have positioned yourself, and they're not hearing you ask them to do what you want them to do. Their focus is somewhere else. Sometimes the fastest way to handle cattle, okay, or process cattle is maybe to take a 10, 15, 20-minute break, go have a cup of coffee, let the cattle settle back down, okay, and then start it again, all right? In terms of handling aids, animals like to move from dark to light areas, okay? And at our Purdue beef unit, the entry to our handling facilities is on the south side of the barn, okay? So cattle basically have to come through a doorway. When the sun is shining, all right, there is always a shadow, all right, as the cattle enter into the barn. And depending on the angle of the sun, it could be in various places, but it's always there in the entryway. Okay, one of the things to help cattle to move across that would be to add lighting over the top of the doorway to dissipate that shadow. Out west, okay, if you've traveled out west very much in range country, okay, obviously the highways, you know, travel through ranches, and ranches want to keep their cattle separated from the neighbor's ranch. And what you will see on highways is white painted lines on black asphalt. The idea here is that the color contrast between the light and the dark, okay, for the cattle, again, remember their eyes, all right, they see that contrast as deep holes, okay, in between the white and the dark. And so they don't travel across it. So it's basically a painted cattle guard. Another area would be loading cattle into a trailer. All right, if you flip on the trailer lights inside, cattle will load much easier than if you're trying to move them at night into a dark trailer. Distractions is another one. All right, let me give you an example. One of our county extension agents, Mark Kepler, his wife is from South Dakota, and they run a ranch. And they decided that they were going to buy a new squeeze chute, okay? And they chose the hydraulic squeeze chute. Well, the facilities are out in the middle of a large acreage, okay? No electricity, so they have to run the hydraulic chute with a generator, all right? They had gathered the cattle, okay? First time the cattle have been run through the new facilities, all right? Somebody went over and started the generator. The cattle were not familiar with that sound. They stampeded. There were 4 people. 3 people of them got hurt, 1 of them seriously, all right? It was a noise that they were not familiar with, all right, that happened all of a sudden. Had the generator been running as the cattle were being gathered, okay, as they were far away, virtually no noise. As they got closer and closer, okay, the noise became louder and louder, but it was a progression, all right? And so there's reasons why in some cases, okay, distractions can also be reduced by using solid sides on your handling facility, okay? The gating, the lead up alleys, okay, your crowding pen, or in the case of a bud box, okay, having solid sides. And that becomes really important, particularly if your facilities are located in a traffic area. Could be a highway, could be people trying to feed cattle, okay, or whatever. So there's these outside distractions. In my operation, it's isolated. There's nothing, okay, in terms of a distraction. I kind of like the open sides, but there are different reasons in different operations to use either solid or open sides in raceways. Driving aids, obviously, I think probably the first and most valuable part of a driving aid is you, the handler, how you position yourself. Okay, and I've given you a couple of examples of that, okay, in the last video. Obviously, using flags and rattle paddles are another tool that we can use. I personally like the sorting stick. I'm getting old enough now, and after you've been working cattle for a couple hours, I kind of like to lean on a sorting stick. Can't lean on one of those rattle paddles or flags without breaking it or without it bending. All right. But the point is that if you're going to use driving aids, use them judiciously. All right. They're not meant to be used as a poking or a prodding device. And hot shots should be used very, very judiciously. And make sure that if you're going to use one, all other options have kind of been eliminated, and make sure that you don't use hot shots near their eyes or the rectums or genitalia. We talked briefly about this before, but a lot of the big feedlots are familiarizing new animals to facilities, okay, on the time of arrival. The day these cattle arrive, if you can get them processed and into their home pen, okay, before dark, okay, that's sure an option. Some people will wait a day before they vaccinate or deworm or whatever they're going to have to do in terms of their processing. But if the cattle arrive late in the afternoon and evening, they probably need to stay in their receiving pen and be processed the next day. There's probably some advantages to letting cattle, particularly if they've been on a long haul, to holding them overnight and processing them the next day after they've had a chance to rest. Location of feed and water becomes important in that receiving pen. Good quality long stem hay can be put in the bunk, okay, and maybe even top dressed with a receiving ration so that we can start to adapt the cattle to your receiving ration. But maybe one of the most important factors, okay, on newly arrived cattle is how they're going to behave. Most of the time, the cattle are going to walk the fences, okay, and if you've got a water in the middle of the pen, they're probably not going to find it. If you put feed in the bunk, they may walk right past it. All right. So putting hay out on the bunk apron, all right, where the cattle are going to walk, what you will find is that, okay, in one of the videos, what you saw is that when they saw something strange, they put their head down and they looked at it. They'll sniff it. They'll look at it. They'll evaluate it. And if that happens to be hay of high quality, they might start to associate that area with the feeding area. Water tanks, okay, if can be advantageous if they're put perpendicular to the fence line. Again, as these cattle walk the fences, they will have to walk around that water tank. And if I can run a hose or run the faucet a little bit so I've got running water, okay, that also may attract them, okay, and put their focus on maybe I need to take a drink. All right. So those are just some little tidbits that might be of some value. The training sessions, okay, in the big feedlots are less than 10 minutes and take a break. Sessions can be fairly close together, okay, and the total session training length for the day could be 30 minutes, okay, for the first 3 or 4 days. Again, as you walk into these cattle, find the leader, okay, it's not always in the front row, it could be in the second row or the third row back, and they are the ones that are watching you, typically with their eyes up, okay, ears up, head up, okay, and what you want to do is you want to show them what you want them to do, okay, and ask them, okay, to move, all right. Keep it positive, okay. Move them towards the feed, move them towards the water, okay, and just let the cattle start to relax with you being in the pen. All right. Slow and deliberate. Respect the cattle. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but I think we'd all realize that cattle that are laying down chewing their cud are probably pretty comfortable. All right. They're laying down and resting. They're interacting with the herd in a normal sort of way. They approach the feed bunk whenever the feed truck arrives. There's cattle over at the water tank drinking water. But when we talk about the abnormal side, okay, those are stressed or distressed animals, okay? They could have diseases and injuries that, again, if the cattle are fearful, they may hide some of these things, all right? But as the cattle get more and more comfortable with you, they're going to start to show those lameness and that first drop in the ear, the nasal discharge. Okay, they're not eating or drinking. They may be isolated from the rest of the herd. Give you a quick story. I had a a beef unit manager back years ago, all right, that was a great manager. His challenge was is he never could see that animal when it was first starting to get sick. The first dropped ear, okay, the little hunched back, the nasal discharge. Um, and so we had to make some modifications when we received cattle to who was going to go check the cattle, decide who was going to be, what cattle need to be pulled and run to the handling facilities and do a temperature and then possibly treat those cattle with an antibiotic as the situation called for. The next step of all this process is making the decision, do I treat the animal or do I euthanize it? And it's all based on what the level of pain and distress is, the ability of the animal to stand and walk, the ability of the animal to eat and drink. Can that animal be transported? Okay, can I put it back into the market system? And obviously the likelihood of the animal recovering, okay, becomes a consideration. So when we think about euthanasia, and it's, if you're going to be in the cattle business any length of time, you're probably going to have to euthanize an animal at some point. And euthanasia is a Latin term for good death. It's quick, it's painless, and then we have to come back and we have to confirm that the animal is actually dead. All right. We have to consider human safety, okay, particularly when we start thinking about firearms and those kinds of things. We need to think about the aesthetics, okay? If we have to euthanize an animal up alongside of a busy highway, don't forget, okay, you could be the front page of the newspaper or in a YouTube video that goes viral with all the cell phone technology that we've got today. All right. When we euthanize an animal, we're probably going to get involuntary movement. We may get some vocalization and there may be some blood. All right. So we've got to be cognizant of that. Another point is don't compromise diagnostic tissue collection. We don't have rabies running rampant in our cattle population, but from time to time rabies can be a cause of an animal disease and ultimate death, right? And so a headshot in that case, okay, where I destroy the brain tissue, okay, I've also destroyed my diagnostic tissue, and that becomes a challenge, all right? And the last part is carcass disposal, okay, rendering, landfill, and burial. There are state, federal, and local regulations, but if you're gonna bury animals, okay, by state law, all pieces and parts of that carcass need to be 4 foot underground, all right? 4 foot for all pieces and parts. In terms of the methods of euthanasia, okay, the captive bolt is sure an option, okay, that basically renders the animal unconscious, and then we use a bleed out as the ultimate cause of death, all right. That's what we use in processing plants, all right. It's once the captive bolt is used, the animal is unconscious, there is no pain, all right, and so it's a humane death, all right. The second one is a barbiturate overdose. Okay, and that has to be administered by a veterinarian because it's a controlled drug. All right, that means I'm probably going to have a veterinary trip charge plus product plus time. All right, so most of us are probably going to resort to the third method, and that's the firearm. If you're going to use a firearm, energy and size of the firearm becomes really, really important. From the standpoint of handguns, we need to have at least a 9mm or bigger, all right, handgun, which will give me a muzzle energy in foot-pounds of over 1,000 pounds, all right? If I'm going to use a rifle, All right, it needs to be probably a 223 or bigger. Okay, again, giving me the muzzle energy necessary to be able to put an animal down. If I'm using a shotgun, it's a 12 gauge. Okay. If it's a small animal, a 20 gauge might work, but okay, if we use these principles, we probably can knock down whatever size animal that we really need. Now, a quick comment about bullets up in the handgun and the rifle category. Do not use a hollow point. It needs to be a solid point bullet, okay? A hollow point on a thick skull, okay? Example, an older cow, a bull, okay? That bullet's going to hit and it's going to splatter, all right? And it may not penetrate. Ultimately, we need to get into the brain, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. If you're going to use a shotgun, you need to use a slug, not birdshot. Obviously, for the same reasons that we're going to use a solid point bullet. If we're going to euthanize, this diagram shows where the brain is located. And so if you have a horned animal, basically from the center of the horn to the back of the eye, and make that X, if you can do that visually, you will hit the brain. If you have a polled animal, it is halfway between the top of the poll and the base of the ear, all right? And then you can draw an intersecting line for the brain and hit the spot. In a perfect world, that will happen, okay, on the first shot, the animal will drop immediately. If you have to take a second shot, you probably got an angry animal, all right? So the other point that I need to make on that slide is that never point and place the muzzle of the gun on the head or on the skin. You need to, the ideal location would be 3 or more feet away from the animal. How do I confirm death? It's a lack of a heartbeat, lack of respiration, and lack of a corneal, okay, or eye, okay, and gag reflex. Gag would be the tongue. So after the animal is down, okay, you can feel for heartbeat behind the shoulder, okay, you can look for respiration, and you can touch their eye, okay. If you get no eye movement, okay, no eyelid movement, no eye twitch, all right, chances are the animal is deceased. If you grab hold of their tongue and you pull it and there's no pull back on it, okay, that's the gag reflex. If there's no gag reflex, okay, then chances are very good that you've got an animal that's deceased. You need to come back probably 5 minutes later and make sure, okay, that what you thought you had done, okay, has actually been completed. In terms of a health plan, okay, you need a veterinary client-patient relationship, or a VCPR. The purpose here is to prevent infection and disease, decrease the need for antibiotics, reduce the amount of residues, okay, as a result of those antibiotics, and less antibiotic resistance. Okay, and a valid VCPR is needed, okay, to legally fill a prescription and a veterinary feed directive. Okay, the veterinary feed directive is that if you're going to feed an antibiotic, such as Tylan, okay, in the feedlot to reduce liver abscesses, or you're going to feed aureomycin for respiratory disease or anaplasmosis prevention, all right, you're going to need a veterinary feed directive, or a VFD, all right, and the only way that that will happen is if you have a good VCPR. In terms of the health plan, okay, the recommended feed additives, okay, which we just talked about, can be used to prevent, treat, or control a disease, all right, but it requires a veterinary feed directive. Medicated feed records are necessary, all right, to be kept if you have a veterinary feed directive. And a VFD is only good for the stated period of time on the sheet of paper. All right. So if you carry over some product, you're going to have to, and haven't used all of your supply, you're going to have to get a new VFD, okay, when that expires, okay, to be able to use the unused portion. And VFDs cannot be done extra label. All right. The veterinarian cannot prescribe anything off the label, and you cannot use the product off label. All right. And so from a record standpoint, you need to invoice what the product is, okay, the date that you got it, the amount, okay, that you have, and the batch, number that comes on that product, and then signatures of those who either delivered or received the product. In terms of pharmaceutical handling and storage, the goal here is to minimize the degradation of animal health products to optimize their efficacy. First step of that is to always read and follow labeled directions. It will tell you how to store that product. And when you're buying the products, okay, buy from a reputable source, okay, where particularly those products that are meant to be stored in a cold temperature, all right, that temperature has been maintained, okay, from the date of manufacture until the time you take delivery of that product. The other part of that is maintaining temperature chute side. We know that heat, okay, and freezing will reduce the efficacy or eliminate the efficacy of some of these products, particularly the vaccines. Make sure that you look at the expiration date. The expiration date is there for a reason. Beyond that expiration date, the product will be less efficacious. Ultraviolet light or sunlight, okay, deteriorates many of these pharmaceutical products. So putting them on the dash of the pickup, okay, is not recommended. Okay, protecting products chute side, okay, from sunlight is also important. When you're transporting pharmaceutical products to chute side, okay, again, make sure that you keep your syringes and pharmaceuticals cool. My recommendation is that you use an ice pack and a cooler, and I'll show you a picture of that here in just a second. Okay, and syringes, they probably need to be, okay, either the single-use plastic syringes or the pistol grip. Okay, the pistol grips are typically 25 cc or 50 cc's. And one word of caution, do not clean your pistol grips with alcohol. Okay, the correct way to clean a pistol grip is to have boiling water and flush that pistol grip 5 or 6 times with boiling water. Okay, do not use disinfectants, do not use alcohol, because when they dry, they can create little crystals on the wall of that syringe. When you reconstitute your vaccines, okay, and you draw up your vaccines in particular, those crystals can deactivate your vaccines, okay? So be careful, okay, on how you clean your syringes. Here's an example of several different chute side coolers, okay? So it could be a styrofoam, it could be a 5-gallon bucket, but with ice packs on the inside. In all of these cases, you're protecting your product from the sunlight, and you're also protecting them from heat, or in the case of cold weather, protecting them from freezing.
In this slide, it demonstrates kind of how you should probably hold your vaccines at chute side. In the left frame of this slide, you see some ice packs down on the bottom of the cooler. In the second frame, we've used a terry cloth, washcloth, or hand towel that we've laid over the top of the ice packs. And the logic here is that we don't want to freeze our vaccines by having it in contact with the frozen ice packs. And then, of course, in the last frame of this slide, you can see a vaccine bottle on top of the terry cloth.
We talk about judicious use of antibiotics. The goal here is to minimize injection site blemishes, antibiotic residues, and antibiotic resistance. Again, the key here is to follow labeled directions, okay? If the product can be administered sub-Q, you want to do that, all right? Virtually all of the products, okay, the pharmaceutical products have the label that says less than 10 cc's per injection site. All right. So if you've got a product that you need to give 30 cc's, you're giving 3 different injections. Okay. If you're giving injections, you need to use kind of the 4-finger rule. All right. So an injection here, okay, 4 fingers away from it. And so on one side of the animal, you probably have maybe 3 injection sites. If you've got to give more than that, you have to go to the other side. All right. Always do it in the neck in front of the shoulder, and I'll show you a diagram of that here in just a second. Okay, and then make sure that you follow withdrawal times. And by definition, the withdrawal time is the last day of treatment before slaughter. All right, so it's a time between last treatment and slaughter. All right, so if it says 28 days, okay, that's the withdrawal time from the last treatment until that animal can go to harvest. Here's an example of injection site zones, okay, or injection site locations. Notice that it is a triangle on the neck. When it was first introduced, okay, it included both the blue and the yellow. Okay, currently that injection zone has been shortened up and moved forward in the neck. Reason for that is that right in front of the shoulder, okay, there are some lymph nodes. And if you inject that into a lymph node, you're going to get a significant swelling, okay, and a significant injection site blemish, all right? Notice on the right side of this slide, okay, where the neck is located, okay, or where the bones and the spinal cord, okay, leading from the head back, okay, into the back of these animals is not right in the center of the neck, all right? So you want to be above that, and particularly if you're using an inch and a half long needles, all right, you want to make sure that you're not injecting into the vertebrae of the neck. Comment about needles. Always use clean needles to enter a bottle. All right, change needles often, okay, less than 10 every 10 or less head. Do not use bent, dirty, contaminated, damaged, or dull needles, and always use the smallest gauge needle possible. 18 gauge is probably as small as most of us want to go because that's a size needle that won't bend easily, all right? 20, 22 gauge needles, okay, are pretty small, okay, and they're easy to bend and they're easy to break. If you have a thick product, okay, a very viscous product, you probably want to go to a 14 or a 16 gauge. On sub-Q, half to 3/4 of an inch needles are recommended. If you're doing IM, the length of the needle is really based on animal size. An inch for the young cattle, an inch and a half for the older cattle, okay, and particularly cattle that have more condition on them. Broken needles are considered an adulterate. It is an emergency situation, all right? If a needle breaks off, and it is your responsibility to go in and get it, all right? Or you need to euthanize the animal. A broken needle, okay, will migrate, okay? We're not going to know where it's going to go into the carcass, okay? And animals cannot go to commercial slaughter with a broken needle. Comment about product handling and storage. If you're using mixed vaccines, which typically are modified live vaccines, we have to mix, okay? Once you mix these vaccines, they have to be used in less than 1 hour, all right? If you can't carry them over to the next day because you got another group of cattle or you got, somehow got delayed, so only mix what you can use in 1 hour. Always use a clean needle to mix and draw from the bottle, okay, and prevent accidental mixing, okay. Recommendation here is if you're giving several vaccines or several products as you process the cattle, label your syringes so that that syringe goes back to the correct bottle of a pharmaceutical that you're using, okay. An example, know of a producer that was using an intranasal vaccine and an injectable vaccine, all right. In the heat of processing the cattle and people trying to help and all those kinds of things, the nasal vaccine was drawn up into the injectable syringe and vice versa, all right? Obviously, okay, a product that was meant for an IM injection or a sub-Q injection injected in the nose was probably not going to work, all right? So make sure that you keep your mixing of products eliminated. Couple comments about record keeping, all right? And if you were to do the online version, there's a fair amount of time spent on this, all right? And it's broken down into antibiotics, chemicals, okay, and pesticides, all right? I've merged those together, but record keeping of what product you use, okay, what the serial number or lot number if it's a pharmaceutical, okay, or the EPA product number if it's a chemical or pesticide. What's the expiration date? When did I use it? What animals were treated or exposed to that antibiotic, chemical, or pesticide? Okay. How was the product administered? Okay. Or applied in the case of some of our herbicides and insecticides. okay, the dose or amount applied, okay, and then the withdrawal time. We oftentimes think of withdrawals as being only on antibiotics. The reality is that deworming agents, okay, some of our vaccines may also have a withdrawal time. So make sure that you read and follow product label. And there are, in some cases, some of the herbicides and insecticides that we use on our pastures and our hay ground, okay, they too can have some either grazing or harvest restrictions. Make sure that you read and follow label directions. And keep records, okay, when we put all of these together, some of them are 2 years, some of them are 3 years. Okay, let's focus on keeping your records for at least 3 years for all of these products, and it's an easy number to remember. Other operation specific protocols, okay, is that you need to think through and in terms of, am I what's the market requirements? What cattle are bringing the most money, okay, in the marketplace? All right, how can I move cattle from maybe average or just above average up into the high value cattle. Right. This may involve breeding considerations. Am I using the right genetics, okay, to produce the kind of cattle that the market wants? Okay, when's my calving season? All right, and when are calf prices, okay, um, the highest? Okay, we know that there are some seasonality in the marketplace, and so not only the calving season, but also when do I market those cattle during the year that I can capitalize maybe on the highest prices? What are my castration and dehorning procedures? And I will tell you that most feedlots would prefer that from the standpoint of castration, that these cattle are knife cut, all right? And if you do a good job of using a Bradesio or a clamp, okay, or you're using a good job of a band, okay, and you actually get both testicles, all right, castration is complete. The problem is that the feedlots get a lot of cattle, okay, that have only been partially castrated. The clamp didn't completely eliminate the testicle, okay, or when they were banding, okay, one testicle went back up into the body cavity. So I've got one, but I still got one, and now I've got stags, all right. Weaning strategies is another one, okay? And think about low stress, okay? And what strategy is the most appropriate? And we'll talk a minute about that here in just a minute. And then nutritional considerations. As far as the nutrition is concerned, nutrition is critical to metabolic function, okay? And when we talk about metabolic function, we're talking about not only the immune function in health, but also the rumen function, okay, that deals with growth and feed efficiency and things that regulate reproduction and those things that create desirable carcass characteristics. We know that there's 5 classes of nutrients, okay, and we need to balance for those. And if you need help with that, there are nutritionists that you can identify through your local extension educator, and they can help you locate somebody that can help you with nutrition, okay? Deficiencies, obviously, of nutrition, okay, will compromise metabolism, immunity, and reproduction. Ration formulation, weaning strategies, what do we need to know, all right, in terms of formulating diets, okay, what are the animal requirements? And there is a new beef requirement tables out now, okay, that have refined how much cattle need to get of each nutrients to perform at some level. We need to understand what available feed resources we have, and we need a nutrient analysis, okay, of particularly our forage components. And we know that the environment and parasite load can also affect nutrition and calf health. Biosecurity goals, okay, is to protect animals from disease by minimizing movement of biological organisms within and onto an operation. Basically, in this category, we are in the business of trying to prevent disease from ever entering the operation. And there are 5 basic components. They call it ARITs, okay? It's assess, all right? What's the potential for disease organisms entering my operation? What diseases are probably most logical to affect my herd? And what's the significance of each disease in the herd? All right, so we're going to assess the risk. Here's a place where your veterinarian can help you as to what diseases are in the area, what do I need to be vaccinating for, et cetera, et cetera. Creating the resistance, that's probably by not only nutrition, but also by vaccination. Isolating animals coming into the operation, controlling traffic, okay, particularly in feeding areas, and sanitation becomes part of that biosecurity protocol. How do I control contamination? Okay, that's really evaluating the ingress and egress. In other words, animals coming in, feed coming in, people coming in, and leaving my operation. Minimize people and animal and feed traffic, okay, in animal feeding storage areas. Um, we had talked about, when we talked about euthanasia, about rendering trucks coming in. Make sure that that rendering truck stays on the perimeter of your property, okay? Because they've probably picked up other animals ahead of yours, all right? They could be dripping juices. You do not want somebody else's disease problem, all right? So make sure that you load rendering trucks outside of important areas that need to be biosecure. Sanitation of equipment, I'm going to spend just a minute here. You know, a lot of us have front end loaders or skid steers. All right. We use that to haul manure, and sometimes we use it to load feed into feed wagons, okay, whatever. Make sure that you clean that equipment between. All right. Not only the bucket, but also make sure that the tires are clean as you move from animal waste areas to animal feeding areas. Direct animal to animal contact, nasal and oral, all right, become an issue, okay? So one of the reasons for isolation of new animals or sick animals. And then we have indirect animal contact with urine, feces, okay, where you can have a sick animal transferring it to feed and water, transferring it to a healthy animal, or animal equipment to animal. New animal additions, okay, you know, either purchased animals or in some cases show animals, okay. When you're bringing new animals into the operation, you know, as much background on herd health and vaccination history is a positive, all right. Quarantine those animals for a minimum of 14 days. Evaluate those animals at that 14-day mark, or actually along that 14-day period, for ADRs. Okay, Dr. Horseman and I worked together for a long time, and he's still my veterinarian. He introduced me to that ADR. What does that mean? They just ain't doing right. All right. Um, and if at 14 days the animal looks a little off, okay, it's not back to complete normal, okay, then probably keep that animal in isolation for another 14 days. For example, shipping fever probably takes about 28 days for it to express itself. Work with your veterinarian, okay, on new animal additions, okay, as to what you need to do in terms of vaccinations and health protocols. And if you have any deads, okay, necropsy them. That's, and particularly if you think that this disease or this condition might be a progressive kind of a thing, getting a heads up as early into the process as possible, and then making sure that you dispose of those deads properly. Cleaning, okay, of pens, make sure that your pens are clean and comfortable. It decreases stress and increases animal performance and well-being. And facility management, make sure that you identify issues, fix problems, and maintain those facilities. And areas to consider are any areas where the animals are going to be housed or moved to or from, okay, are the areas that we need to make sure that we look at and make maintenance corrections wherever necessary. Pen maintenance, mud and manure. You know, if you've got concrete pads in front of the feeding areas, okay, scraping those. Concrete lots, scraping them. If you've got a lot of mud accumulation on the cattle, that should signal that maybe we need to add some bedding, okay, or we need to do a lot cleaning. This is one of the areas where mounds, okay, and open lots can be of some value because they provide drainage, okay, and the cattle can get up high and dry out of the mud and the muck, okay. Alleyways and pens, make sure that the floors and surfaces of those animal traffic areas prevent slipping and falling. Lots of different ways to do that, okay. Give you just one quick example. When we designed the new facilities out at the beef unit, one of the things that I had asked the contractors to do is to do a rough broom on a floor surface that was an alleyway. They came in with a whisk broom. Okay, that didn't work. Okay, there were not deep enough grooves. Cattle had to use that alleyway, and we had cattle that were slipping and sliding, okay, and falling down. What we did is we went in with a concrete cutter and we created a diamond pattern. Okay, so we ran parallel lines this way and parallel lines this way, creating a diamond shape. And I'm not going to say that the cattle won't slip a little bit, but they're not falling down and they're not slipping near as much. And then obviously pens and alleyways to minimize distractions, which we've already talked about. Creating an emergency plan. All right. Do you have a map? Okay, and a list of phone numbers in the case of an emergency, the veterinarian's phone number, the fire, the police, equipment suppliers in some cases. If the fire department arrives at your location, will they know where the supply lines are for electricity? Okay. Gas lines. Okay. Where are the fire extinguishers? Where's your emergency equipment? Okay. Or the skid steer or maybe a plow or whatever it might be. Where's your medicine and chemical storage? And maybe even more important, where's your fuel storage? Okay. In some of these cases. And where's a severe weather shelter at? Calf management, we talked a little bit about that topic here earlier. Okay, weaning management, whether weaning is the first or the most stressful time in a calf's life can be debated. Whether the calving process or the weaning process, which one is most stressful, all right? But consider weaning calves based on cow body condition. Okay, when we've got abundant forages and the pastures are great and feed supply is of high quality, okay, cows are probably holding their condition. Right, but there are times when we're going to be short on feed or feed quality. All right, cows are losing condition. Maybe we need to early wean some of these calves. Okay. The other part of weaning management is to minimize compounding of calf stresses. If we castrate, dehorn, vaccinate, okay, and wean all at the same time, that's adding stresses on top of another. All right. Comment about weaning process. Okay. Fence line weaning, all right, is considered a low stress way to wean calves. It allows sight and sound between calves. Make sure that you've got a good fence between them. All right. And the weaning process will last less than 4 days. I personally use the abrupt weaning, okay, out of sight, out of sound, okay. I literally move my calves 9 miles apart, okay, from the cows, and mine in 3 or 4 days, my weaning process is over. If you were creep feeding prior to the weaning, okay, that also reduces the stress because at least the calves know how to eat a creep feed. All right, that makes the weaning stress a little bit easier. The two-step process, okay, using the nose flaps to prevent nursing while they're still out running with the cows, followed by physical separation is a third way to do that. I'm not as comfortable with that process, okay, as some people are, but it's sure an option. And then calf processing. If you're going to do that and you're going to precondition your calves, my recommendation would be to give the first round of vaccinations, have castration and dehorning done prior to weaning. All right. And calf processing, okay, is recommended at less than 3 months of age. Okay. Branding, okay. If you're going to do that, make sure that you do it either on a hot brand or a cold brand on the hip or the shoulder. Dehorning, okay, can be done with a hard iron, a paste, or a scoop when these calves are little. Castration, okay, again, I prefer the surgical versus the banding. And it's pure mathematics. I can count them 1, 2, okay, when I do surgical. All right. We talked about minimizing compounding of stresses, okay. That newly weaned calf is making a transition from milk to feed, all right, and make sure that your feed quality and your nutrient supply is adequate for that calf, okay, to maintain weight and maintain immune function. It does take about 45 days to develop an immunity, all right, to a vaccine. All right, so if I give my first vaccine at weaning time, the recommendation is that you follow that first round of vaccine with a booster, all right, 2 to 3 weeks later, all right. And if you do it at weaning time, you for your first vaccine, you come back at 2 or 3 weeks, all right. The second vaccine takes 28 days, all right, to fully activate. So the first vaccine takes 14. The second vaccine, the booster vaccine, takes 28. So you add those together, and we're looking at a minimum of about 45 days. Now, if you give your first round of vaccine 2 to 3 weeks prior to weaning time, and then you give your booster shot at weaning, now you've shortened up your preconditioning period to down to 28 days. Okay. The longer the pre-weaning or the preconditioning program, okay, the more weight the calves are going to gain, and so you can capitalize on weight gain as well. If you've got a cow herd, okay, the indicator of balance between the cow and her environment, okay, is really based on condition score. We use a 1 to 9 condition scoring system, with 1 being emaciated, 9 being obese. The target at calving and breeding for cows is 5 to 5.5. First calf heifers a little bit higher than that, 5.5 to 6. Replacement heifers need to be 60 to 65% of their mature weight going into the breeding season, which would put them in that body condition score 5.5 to 6. They need to be about 85% of their mature weight right after they drop their first calf. Again, those cows need to be 55.5 to 6 on their condition score. When you're marketing a livestock, okay, and particularly the cows, make sure that you're considering your health protocols, okay, making sure that you've followed your withdrawals, okay, and accurate record keeping is valuable here, all right. Considerations, all right, are cow age, pregnancy status, soundness, health records, including withdrawals, all right, and body condition. Do not market animals that pose a health risk to the public, or animals that have a terminal condition, animals that are disabled, animals that have advanced eye lesions like cancer eye, animals that have not met withdrawal times, and emaciated animals. In other words, those really thin cows. And let me give you just one quick example. Okay, my son bought an Angus heifer when he was in 4-H. A lot of times these show heifers don't turn out to be your best cows. This one happened to be the high performance cow in the herd. She was now 10 years old, standing in the squeeze chute, getting palpated for pregnancy. Cow was pregnant day 1 of the breeding season, AI. I said, Brian, we're going to check her mouth. She had 3 teeth in her head, all right? And if I can use my fingers, and pardon which fingers I'm using, this cow had 3 bottom teeth, all right? And one was taller than the other 2. Now think about this cow, okay, with a pad, okay, on her top, all right, trying to bite off a blade of grass, all right? Her grazing efficiency was going to go down in the next 12 months, okay, if I kept that cow. While the cow was bred AI day 1 of the breeding season, and she was a condition score 5, 5.5, okay, while we were preg checking, that cow was not going to be a 5 a year from now when she weans that next calf, all right? That cow became a Happy Meal, all right? So think through your operation and make sure that you get rid of those emaciated and lame cattle early. In terms of transportation, use clean trucks, all right? When I'm looking at semis, okay, and particularly when I'm receiving cattle into either a stocker operation or a feedlot, I want to know what that truck, okay, exhaust system looks like. And if I look at the semi and I see a black smoke, okay, soot on the top of that trailer, all right behind the exhaust stack, that's going to be a truck that I really do not want to bring my cattle in, all right? And the reason for that is think about the cattle in the top deck, okay, in the front compartment of a semi. What are those cattle breathing, okay, when they're in transport? Exhaust fumes. Which cattle do you think are going to be the cattle that are going to have respiratory issues once they arrive in the feedlot? It's going to be that group of cattle. And once they get sick, and I've got stressed cattle, okay, that are marginally immune competent, okay, those cattle are going to get sick, and it's going to be a domino effect. So make sure that you got clean trucks both inside and outside from the exhaust perspective. Use a checklist. Make sure that your lights, your gates, your doors, all those things before loading, okay, are in good working order. The loadout needs to be strong and solid, and you can read, and you've got a handout that kind of talks about those, okay, but make sure that you stack the cattle in correctly. Things to avoid: under and overloading. Think about cattle in a transport vehicle. There's reasons why there are compartments. All right, it's to tighten down the cattle so that they're not underloaded. Okay, so as the transport vehicle goes around curves, stops at stop signs, okay, whatever, okay, that those cattle don't have a lot of movement. All right, they can lean against each other, they can lean against the side of the trailer. Also avoid excess transit time, okay? If you're transporting cattle long hauls, okay, make sure that you've got a driver that can drive that distance, or two drivers that can drive the distance, okay, without stopping. All right, and an 8-hour rest at some truck stop someplace. Do not tolerate improper handling by the trucker and your employees. In other words, I've seen cattle loaded in the past where, somebody stands at the loading chute, okay, with a hot shot, and they hot shot every animal as it goes up into the truck. All right, those are all stress factors. Those are going to result in dark cutters. They're going to result in bruises, all kinds of problems. Okay, sort groups to fit compartments. If you're loading a semi or a stock trailer, okay, sort groups into the size that will fit into the compartment. All right, and trying to sort, as opposed to trying to sort off a group of cattle from another group. All right, so get your group size, okay, and then move it to the handling facility. Extreme weather events should be avoided whenever possible. Weather stripping on trucks and trailers, okay, to minimize wind chills and those kinds of things are important. Now, here's the summary. All right, what do I do next? If you have any questions, please direct those to the extension educator, okay, at your location, or my information is down at the bottom of the screen. All right, feel free to contact me. The second thing is, now that you've completed the video, you need to take the BQA quiz. All right. Once you complete the quiz, you also need to fill out the Beef Quality Assurance Producer Contract. It's basically a contract between you and yourself. All right. You basically are agreeing to do the best you can, okay, to follow BQA principles, okay, to create high quality cattle for the consumer end product. The next point is, it is your responsibility as a producer to share your beef quality assurance card and the number on that card with your buyer. All right. That card will give your BQA number, and it will also give you an expiration date. All right. And the beef quality assurance program is good for 3 years. All right. And then you'll need to recertify. But you need to share the card so that they've got documentation of your number. If there are multiple people in your operation, all right, you need that checks will be written out too. All right, that needs to go with that BQA number. All right, so at the sale barn, as an example, Lemonade Your Cattle Company. All right, a lot of times the check gets written out to Lemonade Your Cattle Company, but sometimes they will get written out to Ron Lemonager. Sometimes they will get written out to Brian Lemonager. And oh, by the way, I have a producer that runs some cows with me, Steve Butler. All right, and the check's going to be written out to him. So the only way to verify whether the BQA number goes with a set of cattle is to make sure that you've got all the names, okay, associated with your operation BQA number where cattle are going to be marketed. All right, does that make sense? I hope. And the card holder is responsible for BQA standards. All right, so if you have employees, you have family members, whoever's name is on that card is the responsible party for making sure that BQA gets done correctly. And remember that, as we talked about at the very beginning of this program, the BQA number and card, which is basically a wallet card, all right, will be processed and sent to you via mail as soon as possible after you take the quiz and sign your producer contract.